Greetings everyone. Welcome to today's lecture on evolution of art forms in proto-historic period and thereafter in Indian history. Let us first discuss the concept of proto-historic period, especially with reference to Indian history. So this period can be described as the phase between prehistory and the beginning of historical period. While we have already discussed in detail different kind of art forms, for example painting, etc., as they evolved during prehistoric period, after that the proto-historic period, which basically deals with Harappan civilization, that was a Bronze Age civilization, and some Chalcolithic cultures in Indian historical context, would be the focus of discussion in today's lecture. So if we talk about Harappan civilization, we have already taken into account pottery, different kind of art forms, sculptures, and in today's lecture the focus would be on architecture and especially town planning. The style of Harappan civilization was quite unique, with very few foreign influences, even if they were. The structures were built mostly for functional purposes and had very little aesthetic reasons. The evolution of architecture and sculpture seldom occurs in isolation. However, the architecture of Indus Valley was an exception to this norm. Local cultures greatly influenced architectural traditions, which dated back thousands of years to the first farming and pastoral settlements. So, while Harappan civilization can be traced from 2700 BCE onwards, it was not as if the earlier art forms or the earlier prevalent traditions had not impacted the contemporary traditions. For example, Harappans built their homes on massive mud brick platforms, which was definitely a tradition that was carrying on from earlier civilizations. The elegance achieved with its urban planning was the crowning pearl of Indus Valley architecture, and no other modern culture could match its level of complexity. Now, if we talk about town planning, a very important aspect pertaining to Harappan civilization was the utilitarian perspective. So, Harappans were in fact the first to introduce the concept of civil welfare by creating separate workers' quarters, which has since become a requirement in a welfare state. Harappan cities did not all have the same town design. However, most cities followed more or less similar designs in the sense of usage. Harappan city designs included the defensive wall, citadel, lower town, as well as roads, alleys, drainage system and water management systems, which were found in most of the centers of this civilization. If we talk about the city plan, it was created with the use of geometrical tools. In most Harappan towns, a certain pattern was followed in which the citadel was located to the west of the lower town, although in some cities it was even located to the south. The cardinal directions of streets and lanes were also used to partition certain settlements into blocks and sub-blocks. This again was found in most of the urban centers. The residences were lined up on both sides of the streets. As you can see in this visual representation, this seems to be an aerial view of the civilization of the settlement, which would give you an idea of the streets and the residences that were planned on both sides of the streets. Fortification wall was a very important feature of urban settlements, and it was found in most of early Harappan towns as well as several Harappan cities. The fortress wall defended Kot Diji, Rahman Dehri, Tarakai Kila, Bhuthi, Mehergarh, Dhalewa, Balu, Kalibangan and several others. Another interesting feature was gateways. Most Harappan cities had only one doorway, such as Lothal and Balu, while there were some like Kalibangan and Surkotada which had two or more than two gateways. There were two kind of gateways. One was a plain entry for vehicle activity, while the other had some unique significance and usage. Now this kind of an entry point which was specifically earmarked for vehicle activity kind of conveys the importance of trading activities, exchange, etc. in this civilization. Then some other important features that one can talk about in terms of architecture was bastions. During the Harappan period, defensive walls were used to build this structure and they were used as lookout towers. Again, this could have been to keep an eye on the trading activities going on in the area or also to keep an eye on the defense mechanism. If we talk about the material used, then the excavations have pointed out bricks, baked bricks, mud stones and other mud based materials that were largely employed. And some Harappan cities even had some kind of intercommunication routes that were utilized for the kings, priests and for mobility of people. A very important feature of Harappan architecture was the lower town and citadel. Harappan cities were divided into walled sectors in separate portions of the settlements. These were known as citadels, which was built on a higher platform, and the lower towns. The citadel was constructed on a raised plate shaped, while the lower town was constructed at a lower level. This also indicates some kind of hierarchy having been there in Harappan society. The citadel was smaller than the lower town, while the citadel included public structures like the Great Bath. The lower town mainly had private residences which also were of different sizes. Some cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Kalibangan, Banavali, Rakhigarhi, Lothal, Dholavira and others had citadel and lower town settlements, but some cities did not, as you can see in this visual. Another very important feature was the grid pattern. By 2600 BCE, the principal towns of Indus Valley civilization, that is Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, were built with blocks split by a grid of straight streets running north to south and east to west. Also, these dwellings were built on platforms to avoid flooding. So, one can say that the buildings during this period were disaster proof. Another very important feature was the drainage system. And if we are talking about drainage system, then one has to refer to reservoirs. The Harappans, it has been said, were hydraulic engineering masters. They had devised an effective technique. The drains were built with drips at regular intervals for self-cleaning mechanism. Drains were also a very important part of their structure. Small drains emptied into private drains and big drains drained into huge drains. The enormous sewers carried the city's wastewater outdoors, where it was disposed of in the open areas or in ponds of different types. Stones or huge bricks were used to conceal certain drains. So the concept of drains that were not open and rather concealed also had developed. Soakage jars, manhole cesspools and other drainage system components also were vital in this civilization. Another very important feature was granaries. The granary was Mohenjo-daro's greatest structure, while Harappa had roughly 6 granaries or storehouses which were used to store grain. The surplus production was definitely there, and this also speaks volume about the specialization that this civilization had achieved. The Great Bath in Mohenjo-daro, which is located at the east of the granary, is the oldest water tank ever discovered in the ancient world. The bath's floor was made up of 5 levels. It was waterproof, that it still holds water today. There were locker rooms around, and it was most likely utilized at religious events or festivities, but these are still speculations. As you can see, the visual of the Great Bath. Coming to a description about the houses. The houses were of various sizes, and some of them had even 2 levels. The dwellings were constructed of bricks, and a central courtyard, a well, a bathing place and a kitchen were all included in most of the dwellings. Each home was immediately connected to an effective drainage system, indicating a well-developed municipal infrastructure. However, if we talk about the architecture of this period, then there were some buildings that were absent, which are found in most of the civilizations. For example, temples. Despite the fact that there is no evidence of temple construction or other religious sites, people followed religion. Some religious practices might have been related to the Great Bath. However, no specific structure which could be described as a temple has been discovered. No monuments pertaining to armaments or battle also have been discovered in the excavations pertaining to this civilization. While other civilizations' art has numerous depictions of prisoners or monuments to military triumphs and other warfare related activities, but Indus Valley art does not contain a single such portrayal. The early river valley civilization in India was notable for having a cooperative culture without probably the reign of military rulers, militarily very strong rulers, and this is what has emerged out of archaeological evidences at least. The focus appears to have been on peaceful trade rather than military power expansion. If we talk about Lothal's town planning, then historians have discovered a distinct type of urban design at Lothal in Gujarat. The city was split into 6 sectors, each with its own mud brick platform. In terms of town layout, Lothal differs from other Indus Valley civilization sites in that it has admission to the homes on the main street, whereas other sites have lateral entry. So this is a very important differentiating factor. Then another very interesting facility that was found at Lothal was dockyard. A massive facility on the island of Lothal has been recognized as a tidal port for sea-going ships. There is a lot of evidence that the towns of Indus Valley traded extensively with other civilizations throughout that time period. Trade with towns in this region is mentioned in Mesopotamian records, and items from the Indus region have been discovered in West Asian cities, which further kind of proves the thriving trade this civilization was experiencing. This is a visual of Lothal dockyard, which would also give you an idea of its massive size and importance. So one can say that Harappan civilization was definitely a significant milestone in the Indian subcontinent's historical past, and especially if we talk about history of art. In many aspects, civilization serves as a wonderful model for contemporary times. Their knowledge of urban design, water management, harvesting systems, and drainage systems were truly unrivaled. The artists and craftsmen of Indus Valley were extremely skilled in a variety of crafts, whether it was metal casting, stone carving, making and painting pottery, or terracotta images using simplified motifs of animals, plants, birds. So all these activities that were going on made this civilization a very rich one. Now the next important phase that one can deal with if we are talking about history of Indian art is the PGW culture. As a result of exploration, as many as 650 sites of PGW culture have been discovered. So this painted grey ware culture, which has also been categorized as Rig Vedic civilization and specifically later Vedic civilization, so spanning the period from 1500 BCE to 600 BCE. This particular period, while the main concentration of sites was in Indian Punjab, Haryana, northeastern Rajasthan and the upper Ganges Jamuna basin in UP, the occurrence of some sites has been reported from as far west as Lakhio, Pir in Sindh and Harappa in southern Punjab. Both are now in Pakistan. So one can say that PGW culture has been categorized as an Iron Age Indian culture of the western Gangetic plain and the Ghaggar Hakra valley in the Indian subcontinent, dated roughly between 1500 BCE or to be more precise 1200 BCE to 600 BCE. It is characterized by a style of fine grey pottery painted with geometric patterns in black. PGW culture is associated with village and town settlements, domesticated horses, ivory working and the advent of iron metallurgy. So all these developments definitely had their impact on current art forms. Pottery generally has a red surface and is wheel thrown, although handmade pottery also existed, as has emerged from several archaeological findings. Most of the pottery is polychrome, meaning more than two colors were used to color the pottery, while monochrome means that it was only single color. Most of the pottery is such that they usually have flat bases. Geometrical design along with paintings depicting flora and fauna was a very important feature of these pots. Perforated pottery was also found, maybe which was used for straining liquor. Pottery throughout the civilization was uniform. It was and this also indicates that there was mass usage of pottery and it had little individual creativity. Presence of luxurious pottery obtained from certain sites also reveals economic stratification in the society. So definitely there was transition from tribalism to more a more complex economy, where there was now widening of gap between the haves and have-nots. The sites of this culture are located along river banks, the average distance from one site to another being around 10 to 12 kilometers. However, in a favorable ecological environment, it could be even lesser and somewhere around 4 to 5 kilometers. These settlements were mostly small villages. So we see a huge transition having come from Harappan civilization to Aryan age, in the sense that now the settlements had become rural and they were smaller in size as compared to the earlier settlements, which were small towns or urban settlements, which we have discussed just now. Now, coming to the concept of PGW culture, it can be described as an Iron Age culture of Western Gangetic Plain and the Ghaggar-Hakra Valley, which probably corresponds to the Middle and Late Vedic period, that is, the Kuru Panchala kingdom, the first large state in South Asia after the decline of Indus Valley civilization. It is a successor of the black and red ware culture within this region and contemporary with the continuation of black and red ware culture in eastern Gangetic Plain as well as central India. The PGW sites reveal the development of agriculture and pastoralism, and the settlements of this period grew in dimension gradually. They show a large scale population increase in northern parts of India from later Vedic period onwards or post later Vedic period onwards. The Iron Age in North India was a kind of coterminous with PGW culture, and in South India it was associated with megalithic burial mounds. The PGW cultural phase is followed by NBPW, that is Northern Black Polished Ware culture, which is associated with the Mahajanapada and Mauryan periods. So this is how we distinguish chronologically based on the kind of pottery that was found and how it kind of was different from pottery of the succeeding stages. For example, you can see in this visual some examples of PGW, that is painted grey ware. Now, a very interesting survey that has been conducted of this kind of pottery, one can give example of a survey that was conducted in Bahawalpur. Of the 14 sites that were discovered by Mughal, as many as 7 range between 1 and 2 hectares, which would be regarded as the normal run of the sites. However, the 3 were even less than 1 hectares and 3 fell between 3 and 4 hectares. Only one of these 14 sites is unusually large, that was almost more than 13 hectares. Now this clearly shows the emergence of a chief town amidst smaller villages, a pattern which in due course of time gave rise to local capitals. Excavations definitely point out factual data about house construction, agriculture, technology of iron, copper, etc. To date, the only site where a reasonably large portion of the settlement has been dug horizontally is Bhagwanpura. Now, if we have to take into consideration the findings that have come out from these sites, then at Atranji Khera, large sized domestic hearths have been identified, indicating that large cooking vessels were placed on them, which in turn suggests the existence of large families, specifically joint families. Then circular pits that were discovered in the early and middle phases of PGW period at Atranji Khera contained ash, charcoal, grains and a few small fragments of animal bones, which again suggest their being used as fire pits. So, we can kind of assume or we can kind of conclude how these art forms convey the story of the past. So, even if there are no written records or authentic sources for a certain time period, different kind of findings that one comes across as a result of archaeological digging helps us in understanding the past in a better way. Thank you.